Dear students, hope you are well in the mercy of the Almighty Allah. And I am beyond thrilled to be here to today's class. And our class has been designed for the students of HOSSAIN who are going to appear for the SSC examination in the next year. And our class is on the second paper. And our today's topic is voices, and this item is set in the transformation of sentences. And before getting into things, I would like to introduce myself with you. I am Mr. HOSSAIN, assistant teacher in English at PLSC School of BOGURA. And in the previous class, we discussed sentences according to structure, simple, complex, and compound. And this item also set in the transformation of sentences. Indeed, there are many items are set in transformation of sentences, and among them, voice is one of them. So, we are going to talk about voices today. Please notice the board here. Compare the sentences. Compare the sentences. Ronnie helps me. I am helped by Ronnie. Please notice on the board and compare the two sentences. Ronnie helps me and I am helped by Ronnie. And it is seen that these two sentences express the same meaning, but their structures are different. So, in the first sentences, it is noticed that the person Ronnie is the doer of the action of the verb helps. So, the verb helps is in the active voice. But in sentence 2, we notice that the something is done to the person I denoted by the subject. Here, the verb help, that means can help, is in the passive form, is in the passive voice. So, in these two sentences, we can define the voices, and we already know that voices are of two types, active voice and passive voice. And we already noticed that the sentence 1, in the sentence 1, the verb helps is in the active voice, and in sentence 2, the verb and help is in the passive voice. Now, it will be very easier for us to define the active voice and passive voice in respect or in terms of these two sentences. Now I am going to define active voice and passive voice. Voices are two in number. Voices are two in number. They are following. They are following. Number one, active voice. Number two, passive voice. So these are the kinds of voices, and voices are two in number, active voice and passive voice. Now we are going to define active voice first on the board. Active voice. Active voice when the person or thing denoted by the subject does something, then it is called active voice. Active voice. In other words, in active voice, subject is the doer of the action of the verb. This is very important that in active voice, subject is the doer of the action of the verb. That means the person or thing denoted by the subject performs the action of the verb. We already stated the sentence, Ronnie helps me. Now I am going to again write down the example. Ronnie helps me. Notice the definition of active voice. When the person or thing denoted by the subject, here the person Ronnie denoted by the subject does something, it is called active voice. Or in other words, we can say that in active voice, subject is the doer of the action of the verb. Here the verb is help. Here the verb help, and in this sentence, the subject Ronnie performs the action of the verb help, and that's why in this sentence the subject Ronnie is the doer of the action of the verb help. So this is here the verb help is in the active voice. Here the verb helps. Here the verb help is said to be in active voice. So it's a very crucial thing that the verb is in active form when the person or things denoted by the subject performs or does the action of the verb, or the doer of the action of the verb, then we call the verb the active voice. Now we are going to define the passive voice, or when the verb is in passive form. Passive voice. We already learned that when the person or things denoted by the subject does the action of the verb, then it is called active voice. Now we are going to learn about the passive voice. The passive voice, so when something is done, to the person or thing denoted by the subject is called the passive voice. In simple language, we can also define in this way that in the passive voice, subject is the receiver of the action of the verb, not the doer of the action of the verb. Okay, now notice the definition on the board with much more clear than I had shown. When something is done to the person or the thing denoted by the subject, then it is called passive voice. In other words, In other words, in passive voice, subject in passive voice, subject receives the action of the verb, action of the verb in the active voice, we noticed that the subject is the doer of the action of the verb, but in the passive voice, subject is not the doer of the action of the verb, rather subject receives the action of the verb. This is the major difference between the verb form is in active voice and the verb forms is in passive voice. Now I am going to cite or write down an example in support of this definition. Ronnie, I am held by Ronnie. Here it is seen in this sentence that here the person I and the verb held. Here something, that means the subject I receives the action of the verb held. Here the subject I is not the doer of the action of the verb held, rather something is done to the person denoted by the subject. So it is very clear here that here the subject is the receiver of the action of the verb held, and that is why in this sentence the verb form held is in the passive voice. Here the verb held is said to be in the passive voice. So this is the most important talks about active voice and passive voice. Whenever we notice any verbs, at first we have to notice carefully that whether the action of the verb is performed by the subject or the action is done to the person or thing denoted by the subject, and then we will be easily able to clear the difference between active voice and passive voice. And these are the definition about active voice and passive voice. but only the definition is not sufficient for you to change the active voice into the passive voice. We have to learn something more about active voice and passive voice. Especially, we have to know the different form of the verbs or different forms of the auxiliary verbs used in the passive form according to the sentences, according to the tenses given in the active voice. Now, I would like to say something about the forms of the auxiliary verb when we will change the active voice into passive voice. Now, in these two types of voices, active voice and passive voices, in the light of these two definitions, we can now define the voice. That means, what is the voice? We already know, and I could mention the definition of the voice at first, but it would be very difficult to find out or to figure out the meaning of the voice if we are not able to find out what is active voice and what is passive voice first, as we already know the definition of the active voice and passive voice. Now it will be very easier for us to define the voice. That means, what is voice or what is meant by voices. Now I am going to cite or write down the definition of the voice. Voice is the forms of verb which shows that whether the subject is the doer of the action of the verb or the receiver of the action of the verb. Now we can notice the definition of voice. That means, voice is the form of verbs which shows that whether the subject is the doer of the action or the receiver of the action. If the subject performs or does the action of the verb, then it is called active voice. We already mentioned it. So this is the definition of voice. If you listen it and if you read these voices or study these definitions and basic discussion and talks with much more care and attention, I hope that you will be very HOSSAIN for you to cover the whole range of the voices on active and passive voices. And in today's class, we only know the elementary and basic discussion, basic talks of active voice or passive voices and what is voices. And in the next class, we will learn the rules of changing active voices to passive voices. That means how we can change the active voices into passive voices. So thank you everybody, and thank you all. See you again in the next class.